All right, greetings. I don't even know what to call my audience, but greetings, fellow human. I come in peace. Um, but this channel is dedicated to something that's very dark, which is cloud dynamics in essence, and it's the studying of human history in our attempt to model that. And today, I couldn't help but wonder, or couldn't help but notice how dark human history is. There's a dark essence about human nature. And part of what we're doing here, we're being scientific and we're trying to observe things empirically, in a sense. Kind of this cold, somewhat distant observation of nature, basically. And we're focusing on human nature, especially. And we ourselves are human, and so it can't help but notice that there's some kind of like inner process that goes on. And I think it's very important to kind of acknowledge this, for my own well-being, to acknowledge that there is something very interpersonal, perhaps is the word, very sensitive, perhaps is the word, when it comes to studying the history of human history and then trying to model it mathematically, right? Talk about the cold and different approach. And I can't help but wonder if this is simply me trying to better understand my own anima or animus, which is what Carl Jung speaks about. It's this idea of shadow integration, this idea of individuation. And it's a very important process to kind of understand who we really are. And so this is a creative project, this is a creative endeavor for myself, but I want my audience to understand that as much as I'm going to try to be like logical or perhaps rational about this approach, my intuition speaks to me in a very profound way, and it tells me that unfortunately, there is going to be a level of sentimentality perhaps involved in this endeavor. And especially when it comes to studying something like military cloud dynamics. Why military? I've studied military for a long time, but I think the essence of it is because I, like many young men on this earth, we have this warrior spirit. In fact, many young women as well. We have this warrior spirit, this warrior essence, right? And this is something that seems to exist across many cultures, but this warrior essence. And as I've been told before, the word war is in warrior. And so the part of the big study of human history is recognizing that a lot of human history has involved war. But what is the essence of war? What is the essence of war? Why do wars exist? Is it because of rational geopolitical decisions? Or is it because, human nature still doesn't fully understand itself and it's trying to figure itself out? It's trying to connect with its deeper essences, the darker parts of its nature. And so war is kind of this manifestation of that in many ways. And I think Dr. Peter Turkin does seem to have some understanding of this, A, because he's Russian, and Russia has had this long history of war, as has the United States, and has essentially every single notable power, notable sovereign state on earth. All of them have had this history of war, but I would say Russia and the United States are two very special candidates to look at, because of how powerful they've been in the last throughout the industrial period, and because of how deeply affected they've been because of war. And they won wars too. That's another thing to point out. Soviet state and the American state both won many wars. They've also lost many wars too, but they've been mostly known for winning more than losing. I think in the case of the Soviet Union, it's the conquering of Berlin, the Third Reich. In the case of the United States, I would say it was the conquest of the American continent and all the European powers that tried to dominate this region of the world. I personally am from Colombia, and Colombia is a country that still has very much this rich, complex history of war. And I think it's true for many nations overall. So, not to have too long of an introduction here, but I want to emphasize that a lot of this research, I don't think it makes sense to only approach it purely intellectually, but to recognize that this may be as much of an artistic endeavor, artistic, autistic perhaps as well, but artistic as well. Recognizing that it's an artistic endeavor as much as it is a scientific one. And I believe, I think, I prescribe, I induce or deduce, perhaps is the better word, that, there is the saying that art is a science and science is an art. So that's probably the best way to kind of wrap this up. This sort of introduction I have here is to recognize that, there's this powerful, delicate balance, delicate dance that we're doing here. And we're dancing with this artistic endeavor as much as a scientific one. And this actually ties in really nicely with studying the nature of military, because there's such thing as military science, and military science can both be an artistic project, from what I understand, as well as a scientific one. There is the art of military history, perhaps, and then there's the science of military history in many ways as well. So, with that said, since we have a much more territory to cover, pretty much trying to understand the entirety of human history. My goodness, how on earth are we going to do that? We're going to focus on the military side of things, because it's a little bit easier to make sense of, despite how dark it is. And we're going to happen to focus on the areas that I feel most comfortable or most familiar with in studying the largest wars in human history. And I think World War II overall is probably the best war to look at, but also elements of the Cold War, Civil War, many civil wars. I mean, we have civil wars that are ongoing in the world today. And so it's important to take all this into consideration. But for now, as we continue this journey, these are the goals, by the way, and I want to say that these are goals that I'm willing to achieve in my lifetime. Within the next 10, 20 years, however long it takes, basically. I'm willing to invest this as a project, and I'm not exactly sure why. And that question still requires more exploration, frankly. Why even bother studying all of this? And I just can't help but get the inspiration from someone like Isaac Asimov, another Russian, who wrote these incredible science fiction books. And in the future, humanity seems to have a deeper understanding of its history. So I'm inclined to believe that for the greater good, if such a thing is possible, that, it is a worthy scientific endeavor, really just the nature of every scientific endeavor, to try to better understand reality. And in this case, better understand the nature of human nature, in essence, and looking at it through a historical lens, using the powerful intuitive essence that is history. And so we'll see where all this goes, but buckle up is what I'll say. If you've seen these videos, and I've noticed I've gotten a few people who've already watched these videos, so that's awesome. To understand that we are going to enter a dark space, and we're in the science fiction sense, we're studying the history of the Sith Empire, if you will, if you're a Star Wars lore fan. And the Sith Empire, frankly, is not nearly as dark as the history of humanity, especially in the last 100, 200 years or more. But we want to focus on areas of history where we can get data, right? And so data is a big part of all of this. And so the way we're going to start, the foundation, one of the foundations that we'll have is studying rationality. Because rationality is an attempt to, I believe, leverage or fuse intuition and use it in a more kind of intellectual, call it conscientious perhaps, but primarily intellectual, cognitive, critical thinking kind of space. And we'll see if it's of any use. We'll see. We'll see if it's of any use or value to the world, to the Western world, right? The world of liberal arts. I do think it lines up nicely with the liberal arts endeavor, but it may not be we'll see. We'll have to wait and see where all of this goes. But I do find that because of how technologically driven our society is today, that having data on history is a valuable commodity for sure. But it may not be valuable for another 100 years, for all we know. It may not be valuable for another 30 years, 20 years, who knows? However long until people start looking at the data, start studying the data, and know what to do with the data, frankly. So there's a very, exploratory element of all of this, perhaps even experimental in a sense. And so if you are interested in this, if your intuition is telling you that this is something that you have an interest in, I encourage you to continue watching these videos as I make more of them. And please comment, below, question below, any insights you may have, because I understand that I can't do all this by myself. I know that. I know that much. But so far, I'm going to start with this channel because this is going to be the way I approach and tackle the problem, because I have a lot to learn myself. I'm trying to teach myself as much as any other person this endeavor, and I know that teaching is one of the most profound ways of learning. So I love to teach predominantly because I love to learn. And so that's my introduction. I do intend to live stream this kind of work. I think live streaming is the best way to go. But like I say, I'm experimenting with the channel and I'm figuring out how to pace everything. And I think we're gonna dive in. So thank you so much for listening to this introduction. I probably should take note of the timestamp of how long this has been. Unfortunately, I don't, but I can do that with video editing. But I want to make sure that I have a little bit of video. Like at least some thumbnails, or not thumbnails, but time entries in these videos, so you guys can skip along wherever you would like. But now we're gonna start this video, and we're gonna dedicate ourselves to basically studying rationality and continuing this journey, which has been paved, this experience has been paved by Rob Bensinger, if I'm pronouncing his name properly. And we're going to continue studying his book. It's an incredible book. Highly recommend it. I will post link below on the book. And understand that, having a foundation in rationality may be the key to taking care of our well-being as we dive into deeper and darker waters, basically. Studying, history of the Soviet Union, history of Nazi Germany, history of the American Civil War, perhaps. A lot of dark places to look at, but a lot of places where there's very insightful data that we can extract. And so that's kind of the endeavor, that's kind of the meta, if you will, of this project. And let's dive in. So I'm going to stop here, take a few quick minute break. I'm going to go ahead and use the bathroom, drink some coffee, and come back, and we're going to dive into the rational process. I don't really believe in video editing all that much, so I don't think I'm going to edit this video. But maybe I don't know. Should I video edit? Should I not video edit? I don't know. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to keep the recording going, but I'm going to be back as quickly as I can as we then go ahead and take a live, not a live stream, but take a dive into this rationality book and see how far we can go. My goal is to do at least 30 minutes, but I think I might try to go for more, but I may not have the mental stamina to go for more. I think I have ADHD. I'm pretty sure I have some kind of ADHD. So that's another barrier to the learning experience. So we are going to definitely pace ourselves in this endeavor, but I think consistency is very key to see where this is all going to manifest in the next few years. And I'm willing to commit to the next few years. But like I say, it's dark, and if I don't post consistently, I would say that's the primary reason as to why, because it's so freaking dark. Right? And I'd rather just paint. I'd rather just be a painter and just paint really cool science fiction concepts or something like that. I'd rather do that than focus on all of this. But I don't have art supplies at the present moment, or I don't have a giant canvas that I could paint on. And so I'm going to dedicate my energy into the scientific, endeavor instead. So I'll be back. All right, and I am back. Thank you for your patience. I could try to like maybe add an intermission or something like this. Maybe I can do that in the future, but for now, I probably won't. And the main reason why is because we're trying to understand reality, some aspect of reality. So I kind of want to present reality in its rawest form, in essence. So, anyways, let's dive in. The last video series that we had, I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes because I think that's the length. We're going to try to keep our videos to a healthy length. But I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes. Or maybe I'll set a stopwatch. But basically, the last time we focused on this one chapter of rationality. And basically, we learned my general takeaway, my general understanding of what Rob was trying to get at is that mathematically, in the mathematical sense, rationality can be seen as true or the pursuit of truth in essence. And when you say a statement is of something, you're basically implying that it's true. And I guess you can build a bunch of like logical concepts around that, trying to disprove whether it's true or not true. But basically, this Boolean idea of truth. And then I think something else he pointed out was that there's a lot of words for rationality, but none of those words really mean anything if they have different definitions. That the most important way to ground rationality in some kind of like logical endeavor is to recognize that there needs to be kind of like a common definition of rationality, and whatever that common definition is, that is what rationality is. It's not the alternative ideas or the alternative definitions of what rationality means. And so I'm not 100% sure what exactly, he kind of uses an example of fusality, like you could replace the word with fusality. But I believe like this is the nature of like logic as a language, is to recognize that, things work a particular way, and that's the truth, and that's just it. And rationality is basically our methodology or our approach, our systematic approach to understanding how things work, based on logic, using logic as kind of the foundational structural ingredients or elements, and then you can build a rational concept around that, or rational idea, or rational argument, and so forth. But I really do, at least for me personally, I learned of this term from ChatGPT called rational intuition. And intuition is obviously like more instinctual in nature. It's not so cognitive as rationality is. But I do believe that if you can use intuition to develop your rationality, you have a very powerful tool there. So I think being rationally intuitive is really ultimately what we're trying to go for, especially if we're trying to study something like history and mathematics both. You want to have a strong intuition, but you also want to be able to be apply a rational kind of a logical sequence to understanding how things work in order to get closer to the truth, basically. So there was these two concepts that were introduced. One of them was called anthropic bias, and another of them was called Newcomb's problem and regret of rationality. And so before we move on to the next chapter of rationality, kind of like playing a video game, I'm thinking let's dive into these worlds a little bit deeper, and let's go all in and try to understand what Dr. Let's see here, Nick Bostrom has to say about this idea of anthropic bias. And I think it's really cool because there's a AI company called Anthropic, and so I just think it makes a lot of sense that we just examine what anthropic bias even is. First of all, what is Anthropic? Anthropic is an AI company, first of all, right? It's one of the biggest ones. So I thought anthropy has something to do with anthropology. Anthropology is some kind of variation of studying history, although I think it usually goes further back. It goes to ancient history. But like, let's see here. The word anthropic is an adjective that means or of relating to human beings or their span of existence on Earth. Okay, so it does have something to do with anthropology. And then in cosmology and philosophy, the Anthropic Principle is the proposition that the universe's fundamental physical constants and age are necessarily within a certain range precisely because if they were not, human observers would not exist to measure them. Wow, that's just a total mindfuck. But I think that's what we're going to dive into here, is try to just get through this book. It's a very long book. I mean, how many books have I been able to get through in my lifetime? Not many books. But I think it's going to be worth it to examine. Let's examine this book. I think it's going to be a good investment of our time and energy. I don't know how long it will take me to get through this book. It might take me days, weeks. But the idea is that if we're consistent, we will be able to get through the book. First of all, we have to look at the copyright. Okay. Unfortunately, we cannot. I cannot actually show this book, I'm pretty sure, for copyright reasons. But I think we can use this website here. That's what I'm hoping for. Let's see. Yeah. We can use this website. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so, So basically, the way I understand it is that entropy has something to do with anthropology, which is like the study of human nature, basically. Human history, human nature, and the history of human nature, rather. The human culture, specifically. The studies of human culture, basically. But here's the Anthropic Principle. I want to read that again. Is the proposition that the universe's fundamental physical constants and age are necessarily within a certain range precisely because if they were not, human observers would not exist to measure them. I don't understand that last part, but I think this is a way of, I think it's maybe like the most fundamental principle in the age of modern science that basically proves the existence of God, suggesting that the universe is in a certain age, in a certain way, under certain conditions, precisely because human observers exist to measure them. But of course, I can't help but wonder, like, the origins of humanity itself. Where do humans exactly come from in the context of nature, right? And natural selection and so forth, right? And so it makes you wonder. I'm under the impression that human beings were more like mycelium networks, which are basically networks of mushrooms. We're more like mycelium than we realize. And so, you know, that implication suggests that human nature is almost an inevitability, given that the mycelium networks on this Earth were the first living organisms to exist on planet Earth, and then came other living organisms. I believe it was first mycelium. I could be wrong. Then it was like bacteria. Maybe bacteria came first, but I think it was first mycelium, then bacteria. Then came trees and plants and grass. Eventually, you had living organisms, fish, or sea creatures of certain kinds, not necessarily fish, but like very strange sea organisms. And eventually, you had land organisms. And I think in that entire story arc, it almost seems like human beings are the organisms that come around full circle because we are a more advanced form of a mycelium network. We move faster. We walk, we get up, we move, we expend more energy, we burn more calories than say a typical mycelium network would. But we are interconnected a lot more. And there's like really interesting books that talk about the nature of free will. Sapolsky talks about free will, and it may not actually be a thing, this idea of free will and like the ability to make decisions. And so we may be part of this much larger like network, right? And you look at cultures like Chinese culture, Japanese culture, and you can't help but wonder if there's a hint of truth in that. We're part of a much bigger like community essence in some sense of the word. And I'll leave it there because otherwise we're going to dive into science fiction-y or computer, not computer science, but conspiracy theory waters. And I'd rather not. I'd rather not for the sake of or just maintaining like well-being and respecting like good mental health. It just seems the wisest approach to not dive into too many conspiracy theories about things like mind control or telekinesis or any of those ideas, right? But it makes you wonder. Indeed, it's very, for at least from a science fiction perspective, it's very interesting. But for now, again, like what exactly when this proposition here of what are human beings in this context, you're saying that there's these fundamental constants and the universe was of a certain age and a certain range precisely because if they were not, human observers would not exist to measure them. But I'm thinking, what are human beings exactly? What makes us any different than if, say, mycelium observed the universe, or if trees observe the universe, or if other living organisms are able to observe the universe? What makes us any different in that sense, right? And I think it's the idea that we are somehow conscious organisms and that the natural world isn't conscious. But more and more, I'm starting to believe that that's not the case. More and more, am I under the impression that nature is very, very conscious, and that we're somehow an extension of that nature. We're not, we're not antagonizing nature. Although right now it seems like we, have this inclination to damage the planet, right? But I believe that was some kind of inevitability, basically. And now we're doing the course correction. And so the next, 30 years is going to be humanity attempting to course correct all of the damage that was in the aftermath of the 20th century, right? Starting with like plastic pollution. Most of it is carbon based waste, plastics, fossil fuels. Those are like the main two products of waste that seems to be damaging the planet. But I know that in 1,000 years, I mean, even the plastic is going to break down. Not to justify it, but it is to say that we still are pretty insignificant in the kind of history of Earth, as far as like climate and natural events are concerned, our impact is still relatively small. But presuming that human beings continue to exist for another 100 years, 1,000 years on this earth, the effects are going to be more dramatic. And so it's really interesting that we see human beings today being aware of this. And it's going to take time, but I do believe that eventually our governments are going to find a way to remedy these problems a little bit more effectively. But it's going to require a lot of different moving parts, communal efforts. I know that, for example, here in Colombia, there's like plastic waste in the Amazon, right? And so I visited the Amazon recently, and basically the communities, still generate a lot of waste. But part of the reason why is because the logistics are so complicated out there, because you only have so many roads, and it's like, what do you do with the trash? Where does the trash go? And so establishing a robust system of cleaning up trash is no easy thing to do. It's no easy process to do whatsoever. So these are big challenges for our cultures to figure out. But I do have faith that we are going to figure it out eventually. But it's going to require a lot of willpower on the part of the community, basically, presuming that willpower even exists, of course. But for the sake of like coming up with a linguistic sentence, yeah, willpower, it's going to be what it requires, right? The governments are going to have to shift. The people are going to have to shift their perspective. The nature of the products may have to change. Right now, there's a lot of Chinese products in the Amazon because they're drinking out of bags of water. And so, you can just like throw the bag of water wherever, right? I know that in Japan, everybody's responsible for their own trash. And so that was a cultural decision made in Japan. And the thing is that even in Japan, when you go home, you have a place to dump your trash, and they have a really sophisticated trash cleanup system. So at the end of the day, even if Japanese people are carrying the trash in their bags and they take their trash back home, the trash does leave the home somehow through some kind of robust trash cleaning system. And so that does not exist in a place like the Amazonian regions of Colombia. It doesn't exist. And they do have some basic trash system, but like still, it's imperfect. It reminds me a lot of the American system, basically. So anyways, the Anthropic Principle is really, really interesting. I think it has something to do with anthropology. I'm not going to ask ChatGPT these questions. I'm also starting to realize that I think I need like a lot of fluids to drink for these recordings, because I speak so much, and I like speaking. I like communicating these ideas quite a bit. I think it's very fun for me to do. But man, it's like I need a tall glass of, tasty tea or something to quench my thirst while I speak. So I've already been speaking for about 15 minutes, and it's like I definitely need a way to pace myself a little bit. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to go boil some water, and then I'm going to basically prepare another cup of tea for myself. But I just wanted to, we've kind of clarified a little bit of this anthropic idea. And I guess that's something else, that I can take note in my timestamp. I just want to make sure I got my notes organized here. But the first 15 minutes, basically, we have addressed a new concept built on rationality called the Anthropic Principle, basically. So we're going to stop here. I think we'll soon get into chapter 1 of this book. We're gonna dive into this stuff, and we're gonna go as deep as we can with this. I think my goal right now for today would probably be just to finish chapter 1. But like I say, it's going to be a long marathon. So, definitely feel free to watch this video in parts and like pace yourself as much as I'm trying to pace myself learning this stuff. So I'm going to stop here. We'll take another break. I'm just going to boil some water and, quench my thirst, and I will be back, and we will now actually dive into the work of Dr. Nick Bostrom. Be right back. Okie dokie. So let's start. I'm going to start with the acknowledgments. This work has benefited from copious feedback generated by previously published bits and pieces over the years. Let's see. Oh gosh, it's kind of like I gotta zoom out. Over the years, I must have corresponded with several hundreds of people about these issues. In addition, I've received comments from conference audiences, journal referees, authors, and students. Very grateful. That's great to hear. There is a website associated with the book, The Anthropic Principle. We have the website here. Okay, available online. Although I cannot name everyone who's helped me, we've got a long list of people here who've contributed to his work, peers, mentors, so forth. I won't go ahead and list, um, but I will link this website. I'm going to go ahead and link this website to the video, and then I was also going to link Rob Bensinger's work as well. His this whole section on rationality. I was also going to link that as well. Let's see here, rationality. Bensinger. Okay. So big thanks to certain people, many bright people, I'm sure. But let's get to the preface. So this book explores how to reason, there you go, when you suspect that your evidence is biased by observation selection effects. An explanation of what observation selection effects are has to await Chapter 1. Suffice it to say here that the topic is intellectually fun, difficult, and important. My goodness. That might be the essence of what we're trying to go for with this channel. And that's kind of what we're banking on as far as like the nature of science itself. Intellectually fun, difficult, and important. I would say that that captures really well that just seems to be the nature of science. Yeah. There's other aspects about it too, which is that like I believe it's dark. I believe it's we don't have to do it with fear, but it is intense, and there's this deep darkness about confronting reality and trying to almost like contain the essence of reality, some aspect about it, right? And this idea or this belief that we can even comprehend any aspect of reality is frankly bizarre. It's a bizarre thing to kind of consider, and yet seems to act as one of the engines of civilization. And it makes you even wonder, is civilization even a good thing, right? Or is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing, right? So on and so forth. Postmodernism would say it's a bad thing, and I used to buy into that idea, I guess, but I don't buy into that idea anymore because I think it's a bit biased, frankly. But I've turned to this idea that God has a plan for humanity, and it's important to trust God and trust that process, and realize that humanity is on some kind of vector for some kind of growth. Some kind of critical aspect will happen for humanity. At least that's how it talks about in the Bible. And so we're going to wait and see what happens with humanity. But I know that God, at the end of the day, God will win. Humanity will be okay. And we will have a very bright future ahead of us. But it's going to be, as far as how to get there, I mean, we're going to have to wait and see. In the meantime, we live in the age of science, and science is kind of the tool we have to, one of the tools we have to guide us to a bigger and brighter future, right? So we'll have to wait and see. But oh my gosh, it's just, a lot of like dark possibilities can happen for humanity in the future, right? So we will see where it all goes, how it all goes. But I guess it's important just to say, I don't have to say much more on that. I don't think. What I want to say is that, irrelevant to what the future of humanity will look like, I do believe that trying your best does pay off in some kind of way in the future. I think it pays off. Because, for example, I mean, the life that we have today of like hot water, some running electricity, food abundance, medical help. I mean, they're all imperfect, but they seem to have had a net positive on humanity overall compared to where humanity was 100, 200 years ago. The way I see it is that it's been kind of a progress, and so I am grateful for like the scientific knowledge. But does it fix all of human problems? Perhaps not. Like human suffering and all these other things. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is one of the things that I would love to see humanity be able to resolve in my lifetime is poverty, right? Like poverty seems so unnecessary. And what it is food, shelter, and basically some kind of energy abundance. And I don't see why we couldn't fix that problem in our lifetime. Just across the world, fix the poverty issue. Um, but let's see here. So suffice to say here, the topic is intellectually fun, difficult, and important. Yes, that I think captures the essence of science right there. Um, we will be discussing many interesting applications. Philosophically, thought experiments, and paradoxes aside, we will use our results to address several juicy bits of contemporary science. Cosmology, how many universes are there? My goodness. Evolutionary theory, how improbable was the evolution of intelligent life on our planet? The problem of time's arrow, my goodness. And can it be given a thermodynamic explanation? Oh, that's deep. Second law of thermodynamics, very fascinating. Game theoretic problems with imperfect recall, interesting. How to model them. That might be more of the cloud dynamic essence right there. Traffic analysis, why is the next lane faster? I can definitely tell you that a lot of countries could use an improvement on traffic and a lot more. The sort of stuff that intellectually active people like to think about. Cool. One note to the reader before we start. Whether because of intrinsic organic quality of the subject matter or because of defects in my presentation skills, I have found it difficult to organize the exposition in a completely linear sequence, totally understandable, where each chapter can be fully comprehended without having read what comes after. I had to read that last part there. Um, I have found it difficult to organize the exposition in a completely linear sequence, understandable, where each chapter can be fully comprehended without having read what comes after. So I guess he wants things to be kind of independent. Instead, some important themes are revised many times over the course of this book, yes, and some essential qualifications are added in a piecemeal fashion. I would plead that the reader not rush to a judgment until the last page has been reached and the idea complex has been grasped in its entirety. So I frankly like this is something that I've always wondered about. Like, how do people even write books when your mind is just packed full of ideas? How do you structure the book in such a way? And I think his technique is that you basically write repeat the same concepts again and again and again until they kind of sink in. I know that when it comes to studying chess, when you play a game of chess, you study what in Spanish are called patrones, which in English would mean patterns. But you basically study patterns and you find pattern recognition, and you recognize that not every single setup is identical. Not every single setup is identical. Um, and yet there's still kind of this like pattern theme that you can tap into, and I believe it's the way biologists study biology. I have a background more in chemistry and physics, and so I was a little bit more comfortable like studying certain systems because they just kind of are the way they are. Although I guess in like organic chemistry, you kind of start entering that territory of like similar yet different as far as pattern recognition goes when it comes to the type of molecules. And short story, I wasn't very good at organic chemistry. But I know that in biology, when it comes to studying species, you've got this wide variety of species where each species is fundamentally different than the next, and yet they kind of have this similar pattern theme going on. Take, for example, all the different Homo species of humanoids, basically, or human like Homo sapien-like species, the species that came before, the species that came before, the Homo sapiens, right? So you kind of have some kind of pattern recognition there, basically. So with that, I think I'll stop here. My water is boiling. I'm going to be back, and I'm going to prepare a cup of green tea, and we'll continue with this book. We're already reaching the 30-minute mark. So I don't know how long I'm going to go for this video. I might stop here just to for the sake of pacing these videos. Let's see what the next. Okay, the next one is chapter 1. I think it makes sense that we stop here. This video is already getting pretty long. I've covered a lot of interesting topics. I think the main takeaway here is that science is intellectually fun, difficult, and important. And so it's important that we do learn how to pace ourselves. Questions and comments down below. I love hearing from you guys and gals. Definitely, dare I say, have faith. Although, what does that even mean? Definitely, trust in your ability to learn. Trust in your ability to learn. Realize that you have, the inner compass, kind of like Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. You have that inner compass that can guide you in your growing process. I want you to know that you have the ability to learn new things, and definitely get after it. Go learn it. Realize that reality is incredibly mysterious. There's a very, very high probability that we will never fully understand all of reality. But still, there's a lot of aspects about reality that we can explore. It seems to be a worthwhile endeavor, since we're living in the age of science for the human species. And so, we'll see where it goes, But speaking as a scientist to another scientist, I say keep at it, trust yourself, trust the process, trust in your higher power, and realize that humanity is in a very, very, very delicate growing process, and you're part of that. You're part of that growth. You get to be part of that growth. So notice that everything that you learn, will contribute to kind of the collective awareness of the human species to some extent. Hopefully, that sounds like a good thing. I'll wrap it up here. Thank you for tuning in. I will see y'all in the next video as we continue our studies on anything and everything having to do with rationality. Peace.